This week on Around the Coin, Mike Townsend, Brian Romley, and Faisal Khan discuss Brian's trip to the White House, meeting with economic advisors in a collaborative plan to improve America's payment industry.
Good morning, guys. Brian, Faisal. This will be another exciting episode of Around the Coin. Today we'll be chatting about the Wiki project and Brian's endeavors in the White House. How are you guys both doing?
Doing good. How about yourself?
I'm great. So news as of late, Brian is hanging out with Barack Obama. Brian, what are you up to?
Yeah, we go way back. Well, I had a small part in a little project. I was discovered through Quora, through one of the chief economic advisors to the White House over, just general discussions about payments and such. And we had drifted onto the conversation about some of the challenges that small businesses are facing in these times. I mean, what are the biggest problems? And of course, we centered around payments and such. But one of the things I focused on has always been a problem I've seen in the industry. I faced it as a small business owner for many years, dealing with very large companies and government, as a government contractor with some of my projects. And
Brian, I'm curious, before you kind of dig into details, how did that actually work? Did the White House send you a letter? Does the Economist give you a call? I mean, I think that's kind of an interesting. It was
very, very informal. Just got an email.
Were you consulting for them?
No. Did they send you a Quora message?
No, I think they went in through a LinkedIn, and it was very informal. Hey, just wanted to shoot the breeze. I didn't really originally think it was very serious because it just, didn't, you don't expect that, but turned out to be incredible guy. I was talking to up there, Brett, and he. Can
you say who it is?
Yeah, a gentleman by the name of Brett Haxon, and he's one of the White House economic advisors. Oh, and awesome. Just incredible, brilliant individual working within the White House staff on economic issues. And it feels very much like a startup environment. And I mean that in the most positive possible way. Just a very can-do, let's see where the problems are and let's see how we can address them. And, I've had absolutely zero contact with anybody within politics. I stay very out of politics. And I don't see this as political at all. I see it as, the government getting work done. And that's what basically happened. We had some conversations, and there had already been some ideas, I guess, within his group. And my thing was just how much trillions of dollars are floating in the economy in this sort of netherworld where it's not actually, it's due to the small and medium-sized business, usually within net 30 days. This is called net 30 terms. And typically, for those that have not worked in this type of area, is that when very large corporations or government, where it can be the military or such, place an order, they send a purchase order. And it's a very cleanly defined document in most cases. It tells you exactly what they're ordering, what they're going to be paying per unit, when the expected shipment date is, and all the other particulars. And generally, it'll say net terms 30 days. It's very rare to see stated net terms beyond that, and sometimes you'll see it in less days. So you take that and you verify it, and then if you're a manufacturer, you're making, let's just say, metal parts or something like that for Apple, you start manufacturing. But, let's just say it takes 10 days to produce $1 million worth of parts. You now have effectively $1 million in,
So are they talking about, creating a law that says, or are they talking about building a system that makes it easier, or what's the?
Well, it's a combination of things. First, let me finish what happens here. You send the product to the company that placed the order, right? You do that within the agreed upon specified terms. and you expect to get payment, usually still by check, within 30 days. And a lot of people don't understand it. They think, the quagmire here is the payment option. It really isn't. What had happened since, I've detected this since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, when you study the history of how net terms and purchase orders have developed. The extended net terms, or the unagreed upon net terms, have slowly built since the 1950s, primarily the auto industry. The auto industry would use thousands and thousands of small businesses to do different parts. And slowly but surely, they would let net 30 become net 60, and then net 90, and then net 120, and then in some cases a year. You're working a year delayed in payments.
It's such an incredibly high time. It's unbelievable that just slipped throughout the course of history.
Well, that was a lot of reasons for that. What happens is it's almost like something you're caught between a rock and a hard place type of quagmire. All right, you're a small business, and Apple calls up, for example, and says, "We want to buy 10,000 widgets a day, and here's our purchase order." And you're like, wow, that's, by far, by 45 billion%, the largest customer they ever have. And, Apple will do some vetting to make sure you do have the ability to manufacture. They verify all this. But let's just say you have this capability. And again, I'm not picking on Apple. Apple is actually one of the participants here. So they are trying to be a good corporate citizen. What happens is typically, the net 30 days will actually wind up drifting, even in the best relationships, to at least 2 months, maybe 3 months. And
is that the inability to pay, or the decision? I mean, it must be a conscious decision on these merchants.
I would think more like economic arm twisting, right?
Yeah, it is in a sense. It almost becomes like the 10 billion pound elephant in the room that you can't talk about. Because basically what happens is, if you're a small producer and you really covet this large relationship, what are you to do if the terms start extending beyond what you expected? Now, the worst operator that I've been able to detect in doing this was Walmart. Walmart not only negotiates people down to the lowest possible profit margin, they also tend to pay very, very far out. In some cases, they don't even pay. Here's what they do. They'll say, I'll take your product, put it on the shelves, and we'll have it out there for 10, 15 months, and then I'll send you back what we don't sell, and I'll pay you for what we did sell.
Wow.
And this model is very harsh on small businesses. If you've invented a new widget and you said, oh man, this should be on the shelves of every Walmart. I've seen this time and again ever since I've consulted with businesses, 30 years. So I have this great idea to put something on the shelf of Walmart. So they go down to Arkansas. Literally, they find out how to do it all. And then they're heartbroken when, first off, they're told exactly what their margin's going to be. Because by that time, companies like Walmart will know exactly what your costs are. They'll know who the vendor is that's making it in China. They'll know exactly what your margins are going to say. This is what we're going to pay. They're not going to tell you what your margin is, but they're going to say, this is what we're going to pay. This is how many we're going to need. And this is when we're going to pay it. And it's a very, very tough business. But getting back to the net terms. So now you have these big relationships that you're trying to covet as a small business. What do? You make a demand call. You get a bill collector. You almost have to grin and bear it. So what the White House is doing is on Friday, a presidential order was signed, which is essentially an agreement. Well, actually, two things took place. One thing is called supplier pay, and it's an agreement of I think it was about 40-odd companies, 26 companies, and probably by now 40, including Apple, IBM, FedEx,
large corporate
Honda.
Companies.
Yes, and they've made a pledge. Now, it's a pledge, but it's not currently. It's not any rule of law, but it could go down that road.
It's moving in the right direction.
Yes, because it's a pledge that they're going to pay in net 15 days, and this is phenomenal. Net 30 would have been great. Net 15 is amazing.
And it starts from when? Now, immediately.
Yeah, I mean, all of Apple is definitely in big leadership here, and they're saying effective, at the signing of the agreement, I guess, that they're going to start funding within that 15 days. This will incredibly charge the economy, with funds that have been in limbo because they're unassigned funds. I mean, the company, even though they're making perhaps interest on it, I mean, it's not really doing anything in the economy. You inject that right into the small business community. You're going to see hiring. You're going to see all sorts of things that you haven't seen before. Because I'm not saying the Apple case,
economic
but some of these,
traction, basically.
Yes, but more importantly, it's brought attention to this, and it allows us to actually talk about it.
Right.
Because the last thing you ever wanted to do as a small business is to publicly stand up and say, IBM hasn't paid me in a year. Okay, guess what? You're never going to see another purchase order from IBM unless you got something that's incredibly valuable. So now it's sort of open.
Do you think the corporate companies realize that this is coming full circle for them? If they make the lives of their suppliers better, then they're essentially going to have access to better quality parts and all the supplies that they're purchasing?
This is exactly why the leadership of President Obama on this is very, very important, because what they're trying to do by bringing all this together, and it's not just some political, show. They're trying to literally say, listen, this creates a healthier ecosystem. Mr. Large Corporation, Mrs. Large Corporation, you will actually have a much better ecosystem if you pay attention to the forest floor, if you will, all these millions of suppliers, because it's more robust for everybody in the economy, and it's not anything artificially generated. It's just people following on their stated commitments. And, I guess over time it could become an enforcement. I mean, I'm not saying that that's a direction. I have no idea. But over time, the government could do this. In Europe and in France in particular, it became a legal requirement. You had to pay an X number of days or you faced huge penalties as a corporation.
It always seems like whenever the government gets involved in a regulatory perspective, it always seems to go the negative direction.
Unintended
right?
circumstances.
I'm glad that wasn't the result.
But
this is amazing.
I have two questions on this thing. Number one, how is it enforced? And number two, because of the billions and billions of dollars that they now suddenly have to pay up immediately, how would it affect the companies themselves? Because this was essentially cost of funds was zero for them, and they were sitting on suppliers' money and utilizing that for operations.
Well, first off, all the companies mentioned are extremely healthy, all right? And I think the very healthy companies are going to jump into this just because they look like much better corporate citizens. The enforcement is really public embarrassment, I guess, is really what it comes down to. It's not like there are rules of law that are going to enforce this, but there is the pretense that if this becomes obvious, now that it's out in the open, more obvious, there's certainly going to be a lot more pressure to be had. And I think by these companies standing up and taking leadership in it is amazing. I mean, it's really historic. And the other thing that took place was something called Quick Pay. Quick Pay was a federal government rule that had been around for a while. And unfortunately, during the budget crisis, Quick Pay was deactivated. And what Quick Pay did was it said that if you're the government, any division of the government, whatever Department of Defense, et cetera, you should pay your small contractors in a timely way. Now, I don't pretend to understand all the minutiae of the law, but the detail was you had to be within a certain range of the specified terms of the purchase order. When the budget crisis took place, that was deactivated. Net terms started to explode. And President Obama reactivated that under executive order. So that was a very positive. These two things stand very strongly. But heretofore, there was never a private sector version of this. And frankly, it is such an underground sort of thing. So many people didn't know it even existed as a problem that, it's now out in the open to be discussed. And I think you'll see more companies jumping aboard saying, we want to support it. It is also going to make it very hard for companies. I mentioned Walmart. Walmart had, and they've even publicly admitted this, that some of their negotiating tactics had caused deep economic problems for some small companies in the United States. Some were driven out of business.
So Brian,
so this could change. It could be a shift.
I'm curious, before the show, we kind of dug into some of the history there with just-in-time inventory. What did this look like way back in the day? Was there sort of an evolution to the point where we're at now that led to the White House making this decision or rallying these companies? And the second thing I'd want to discuss is, was there other things that you talked about with the chief economic advisor? Were there other sort of macro projects they wanted to eventually tackle? Anything else coming down the pipeline?
Well, I'll do the
history
first one.
First.
Yeah, the history. Well, letters of credit and purchase orders have been around since the Industrial Revolution. Even prior to that, they were called different things. Insurance companies and the Dutch with, the worldwide shipping operation, the East India Company and the British. I mean, it goes way back there. I mean, you got to remember some of these spice companies, you would buy the spice as a merchant, but you would be pretty much having to go to an insurance company to make sure that ship is going to return, because it's sometimes 12 to 14 months later, going around the, Horn of Africa or, however they were, transversing the globe. And that's how Lloyd's of London really got started. And a lot of the Dutch insurance companies, they did phenomenal, because they would actually go out there, examine the boat, know who the captain was, and then install some of their own people on that boat to make sure that their interests are being cared for. It was, some say it was a rigged system, because some of the people who got no insurance, the boat never showed up, but pirates showed up and they knew exactly where it was. So anyway, long story short, the idea of a letter placing an order with no money it requires a lot of trust. I mean, it requires that you pretty much believe the person placing the order is legitimate. International commerce generally have, guaranteed letters of credit, which are somewhat complex when you really think about it. It's somebody essentially saying that I'm vouching for the person that's sending this purchase order out, and the letter of credit is not the actual cash. It supposedly is going to be an escrow and execute, but over the years that has really become much more of a complex type of transaction. So, the purchase orders that we're familiar with today pretty much started with the rise of the industrial age and primarily the auto industry. I'm thinking audio all day today. The auto industry essentially, when they were starting up, especially Henry Ford, they did not have anywhere near the number of machinists that they required. And not only that, they didn't have access to enough energy, enough raw materials. So they had to go around the country to find small factories and groups of workers to make specialty parts that were sent by rail to be assembled. In the early days, this would require huge warehouses, and they would just buy what they would think they need. And that's how the autos were built for probably up to the 1950s. And then the wisdom came that, well, the shipping mechanisms are such that we can rely upon them. So what we're going to do is keep everything in the warehouses of these companies that we're buying from and then demand it show up on an exact date.
It almost makes, logical sense to go in that direction of
so all of a sudden, and this is when just-in-time inventory concepts were being built. It's mostly been attributed to the Japanese, but the Japanese in the 1960s primarily, and more in the 1970s, really mechanized this. A lot of it had to do with the MacArthur Plan and really trying to get the Japanese after World War II up to speed. And there was always this vision on how they can be more superior in manufacturing. But it worked really well in Japan because it was really a close-knit group of suppliers that were physically pretty close to each other. I mean, so the just-in-time inventory concepts were literally the next morning the parts would show up. And so some of the early Honda factories had almost no inventory rooms to speak of. The parts would show up at the back of the building all at once, all these different suppliers. They'd come in and cars would show up on the other side. I mean, it pretty amazing. I'm simplifying, but that's pretty much what happened. So during this just-in-time inventory experiment in the 1950s, the auto manufacturers started delaying on their net terms. Now, the delay has been going on for a long time. I mean, it says, again, the stated terms on most purchase orders are 30 days. Well, Detroit started realizing that, they had their suppliers pretty much on the chain, and they could delay that to 60 or 90 days without them complaining too much. And so somebody with a really sharp pencil and, an MBA probably sat there and said, boss, I think we can put everybody on net 90-day terms, and we'll have more money for, and the next quarter will look really good to the stockholders. I mean, usually it's something really short term. And it probably did. That next quarter, they said, wow, this company's flush with cash.
It just kind of evolved over time, got longer and longer to the point. So the White House is not impacting any regulatory mandate by saying you have to do it. It's really just a pledge.
It's a pledge, but in the 1980s, it started growing rapidly. Again, with Detroit, 6 to 9 months, 12 months was not becoming uncommon for small suppliers as the auto industry was suffering.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and then in 2008, it became epidemic when the economy started really hurting in the United States, and became epidemic where all sorts of businesses were doing this to each other, not just the very, very large, but the medium and the large, small, larger businesses. And it was getting out of hand. And you have to, from a leadership position, what do, right? You sit there and you look at this and you say, how can I do this without creating draconian laws that could have unintended circumstances? In Europe, they created the laws. There haven't been very many unintended circumstances. But, credit to the administration is they're saying, let's see how this works. Let's see how this really works within the economy. And let's see if people pick up on it. And the fact that they're able to get these companies to stand up and to recognize the issue and to pledge is amazing. And at the same time, Apple announced, just how large their buying of U.S. parts was. I think it's $7 trillion investment that they have in the U.S. economy. This is very substantial, and there's this drive, especially with Apple. Apple's plant in Arizona, primarily my favorite Sapphire with GT Technologies. I mean, this is a significantly large operation. It's primarily solar. I believe that we're going to be seeing a whole lot of Sapphire products coming out of Apple. Probably first the watch, maybe.
So these are,
watch in the spring.
Brian, are these? This is not. I'm curious. Sorry, maybe I lost track. Are these future projects descended from the White House, or this is projects Apple is thinking about?
No, that's just Apple. Now I'm just digressing.
So,
the future, I don't know. I mean,
did they give you any insight? Did you see anything written on the whiteboards when you were?
Well, I've never physically attended yet.
Oh, okay. Okay.
At some point.
So I had a question regarding all this. Was this done because the U.S. economy was seeing circular debt? The big guys not paying the small guys, and the small guys are not being able to pay the other guys because they've not been paid, and hence and so forth. So
not at all. Not at all. I don't think that. Well, I can tell you from my perspective and my little part that I played is that that's not where I think the inception came from. The inception came from being very much like as if you're a startup founder looking at the world, looking at the United States and saying, where are the problems and what solutions can we make? It was very, very refreshing. And
it's almost a classical case of circular debt because, because if the second layer, which is the most important layer, has not been paid, then they will trickle it down further to their, suppliers and, the people that they work with. If someone is manufacturing a small item for Apple, certainly they're running a factory themselves. They are sourcing material, raw material, people, etc. And when they don't get paid, the effect goes forward to their suppliers, which then goes forward to their suppliers and so forth. So
this is a world problem. I mean, it gets very complex when you start looking at trade imbalances and deficits and stuff. This is beyond my my deep comprehension. But I mean, if you're dealing with a product that has parts and companies from all around the world, let's just even look like this is why Tim Cook is a brilliant individual, because he really built that supply chain for Apple, and to manage all of those relationships and to get all those parts into one product on time with an incredibly low failure rate is difficult. But and of course that has deep reverberations in the economy. But from the White House standpoint, they're just my interaction has been they're just wanting to go out there and look at where can we be innovative, where can we do something that can make some change.
But it looks like a classical case of taking your Pareto values, your 20% of the companies that can affect 80% of the economy and so forth. And and all the telltale signs suggest that this is a circular debt issue. Maybe no one's talking about it, but it certainly affects. If you have 20 or 30 companies affecting, let's say, 10, 15, 20, or maybe 50,000 businesses, and they don't get paid because the 20, 30 companies are not releasing the funds as promised, that's an issue,
Yeah, but what it does is it creates an artificial middle economy of invoice and purchase order factorers. And these companies...
Yeah, but they erode the profit margins. I mean,
they're eroding...
Factoring or discounting, as it's called, they just... Because, if you're working with a supplier like Walmart is very ruthless. I mean, you can read all the books about Walmart and they'll tell you how they will erode every single piece of profit that they can from you, until you say no more. And that's when they sort of decide to work with you.
Or actually put you out of business.
Yeah.
I mean,
and they do that. So
I don't even know if that's an intention, but how else could it work? I mean,
if you're discounting for like 5% or 6%, my God, you've totally taken the profit out.
Well, if you look at what some Walmart products, let's just take U.S. companies that are selling into the Walmart ecosystem, which has become less and less. The typical margins that some of these manufacturers have are sometimes in the single 1 or 2% profit margin. And they're hoping to make it up in volume, that classic sort of, we're keeping the factory open and we're making it up in volume. But really, it's sort of like running your car at high speed all the time in hopes that you'll catch up to something, And over the decades of analysis, that philosophy of, well, at least we're keeping our workers moving, or the Groupon philosophy. This is no different than what Groupon does to a lot of restaurants. It's like, well, okay, it'll keep my wait staff in tips, it'll keep the bartender in tips, and we'll move people through the business, and hopefully we'll get 1 or 2 regular customers. But without an effective plan, you don't have that. So this is part of this kind of problem, and I think it's just it's fascinating to me to see this sort of speed and dedication, within the economic advisor group. It's just amazing to me.
From a numbers point of view, do you have any idea of how much dollars are currently, so to speak, suspended because of this problem, and how much will flow back into the economy once it's resolved, just by these 30 companies?
Faisal, this is a great question. I spent quite a few months digging and going into the various trade groups. There's only one trade group in the United States. There's 2 in Europe, and trying to get their official statistics. It was in the trillions of dollars of how many outstanding purchase orders and invoices were being financed at any given time. And it's funny just how small the industry is. There was less than 1,000 members in the United States factorers group, and very close-knit group of individuals. And I can't say that they're all a bad group of guys. I always... factoring has a long history.
They are. There's no doubt about it. It's a very, factoring is something that's almost considered a very Shylock type business. It is looked down upon in almost all aspects of society. You can give it any fancy name, but I'm sorry, it is still, it's absolutely taking advantage of someone who wants money,
Well, it's like payday loans, and it's like merchant cash advance. I'm on the same, resonation here, but I can also say that at times it does offer relief for some small businesses, but it's like anything else in credit. It can become extremely addictive. I've seen I've seen some of my merchants who needed 25 more presses, metal presses, right? And they just could not get bank loans. They could not find cash anywhere. Well, that's an inefficiency of, the available capital market. It's not an inefficiency of these companies. Some have been family businesses turning products out for 100 years and have contracts with the government, for example, for the next 15 years, right? Making a widget. So they go to the bank says no. And they're like, okay, what do I do? They bite the bullet and they factor, 20, 30, 50% sometimes of their invoices or purchase orders, and then wind up taking that cash and building the machines and then hopefully making up that profit.
Well, when they're factoring, what exactly are they doing there? They're taking the invoices and what,
you're discounting it for future value. So what you do is something is worth $100 right now. You say, listen, you say, listen, you're 100% sure you'll get it in 60 days? Okay, fine. So I'm going to factor it by 5%. So that's $95 in the first month. And I'm going to factor it by 5% more. So I'm going to take 5% off 95 off. And that's approximately 91, let's say. And I'm going to give you 91 today.
Oh, I see.
Or it can also be recourse and non-recourse. See, there are some non-recourse factoring environments, and that creates a much higher factoring ratio.
But that money is coming from the purchaser.
It's coming from a person who's purchasing the instrument from you.
Right.
Let me lay it out, because it is actually pretty easy to get confused. Okay, the Department of Navy calls you up and says, we would like to buy $1 million worth of widgets delivered in 90 days, right? They send a purchase order for $1 million FOB, and it says 30-day terms. So let's not confuse it. The company is producing it, takes 90 days. After they deliver it, it'll be 30 days later. So here we are at day one, right? The company says, holy cow, I need to be able to get some financing to buy some inventory. So they take a fraction or the full purchase order, deliver it to a factorer, and the factorer will do his mathematics and come back and say, okay, here's a ratio of what we'll pay back. Here's how much cash we'll put up front. And this is what you need to do. Now, technically, some of these contracts are not allowed to be factored, and there's ways that you can do that which are legal, but they're bending around the rules. But let's just say it's legal to factor the contracts. Some are built in that say, no, you can't do that. It's hard to enforce.
If you don't pay, essentially their collateral is your company.
No, the collateral is you've signed irrevocable letter of credit based upon the outstanding purchase order.
They'll have first right on your receivables, basically.
Yeah.
Right.
Whatever the receivables may be, from wherever they may be.
A UCC in the United States, a UCC filing could take place, and that will notify the world. But there's other things that can happen in a non-recourse type of scenario. That means a factorer may have a relationship with the company that's buying the goods, right? So they'll call up the company and they execute a three-way contract that says, okay, for this invoice, you don't pay manufacturer X, you pay factorer A. When this invoice is, when the product is complete. Those types of scenarios are not very common. They were pretty common in Europe, but there is some
pre-manufacturing factoring is the worst.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's the worst.
I mean, is that the old school replacement for Kickstarter? Is that what people did before Kickstarter?
Pretty much, yeah. But it
still happens today,
No, it happens. More than
anybody
realizes.
What I'm wondering is if these 30 companies are, let's say, and I'm just going to throw an example. Let's say they're holding on to $300 billion, right? Mm-hmm. And they're easing it very slowly into the economy after maybe 10 months or 9 months, which is the average payout period. If you can have them pay that out in 15 days, I mean, forget about quantitative easing, you suddenly have $300 billion being pumped into the economy, acting as a catalyst, which will further go downstream and, that can really jumpstart the economy.
Do I smell a business opportunity? Right. Is this lend up for businesces?
It's not really a business opportunity. That's what's funny about all this.
I think it's more of an economic, a macroeconomic variable being put right,
But it's just people doing the right thing, Faisal. You're right.
Execution strategy, basically, on a macro level.
And guess what? The only only entity that could have done this successfully is the Office of the President through leadership. I mean, literally is something that you have to stand up. He stood in front of the press, explained this in an immaculate way, and just really, brought the problem to the Wall Street Journal, Business Week, all the business publications. So now it can be out in the open, and there's some embarrassment for some of these companies because there are going to be reporters that are already starting to call up some large companies and say, how long does it take for you to pay your small suppliers? We're 9 months. It's like...
But, Brian, if I can borrow a term from your American football, it's almost like the current version of the payouts on all these invoices is unnecessary roughness, It is. And this is one thing that they can come into the economy or, to these companies and say, listen, unnecessary roughness, timeout.
15-yard penalty.
Absolutely.
Yeah, 15-yard penalty.
15-yard penalty, and you pay it right now. And there's nothing to it because this is removing debt that they can remove very easily.
Yeah. This is not gerrymandering with rules and laws. It is just setting the thing that should be right in the right way, and it's win for everybody. So it's beautiful. But a sidestep to this, which is sort of a different issue, is something called floor planning, and this is an old retailer type of scenario where you effectively open up a store, and you can't afford to put your inventory on the floor, right? So what happens is you find either a floor planning company, which could be a factorer, or the company itself, like Yamaha, Kawasaki motorcycles, for example. A lot of these very small dealers, they couldn't afford to have 35 bikes, motorcycles sitting on their lots. That's a lot of thing. It's a lot of money. So they floor plan it. What they essentially do is they're putting the product on the floor. It's their product, and very much like I was talking about what Walmart does, but it's somewhat nicer. They say basically pay us in 120 days based on an inventory count. If you lose something, sorry about that. You're responsible for it. So we sent you 35 motorcycles. We do an inventory count. You pay us on what's the difference. And a lot of time, the financing for that motorcycle, Harley Davidson used to do this. They don't need to do it anymore. The financing was factored into the entire scenario. So it was really brilliant because, again, as inventory, you as a manufacturer, you're getting all your inventory as much as you can out in the field. And you're hoping that as it's being showroomed, that people will buy it. And then you got the financing for it. Because usually on these showroom floor planning scenarios, you actually get preferential first right of refusal for the financing of the item. So that's a variation. So there's some great things in the way this works. There's some downsides to floor planning because sometimes, if you noticed, back in the 90s, a lot of dealers were being shoved more and more vehicles to keep their franchise with the auto companies. They said, listen, you have to take $5,000 a month, whether you're selling them or not, and you just keep building them up on there, and you can't resell them to other dealers, and you can't sell them at discount. That almost became
arm twisting.
Rock and roll. Well, it is, and it goes on today. I mean, everybody does that. And then there's paying for actual shelf space at retail stores. A lot of people don't recognize that when you go into most retail stores, that certain shelf space is actually being purchased by the square inch and paid for on a monthly basis. It's interesting you bring
that up, though. Why is that? Why do you look at that and say, "Oh boy, that's a business practice that is questionable"?
Slotting fees? Yeah. These are called slotting fees. Here's why.
Seems legitimate to me.
All right. Well, yeah, and yes and no, but it starts getting very exclusionary, and it is really a drag on the small business. Here's what happens. So you have this great product, and you're not going to play the Walmart game. So you go to Target, and Target says, "Oh yeah, we'll take your product. It's going to take up 35 square inches of pegboard space. Our slotting fee is $10,000 a month per store."
Display advertising.
It's not, well, that's how people look. By the way, that's why Square was on so many shelves. And, that's the unknown thing. Everybody thought that Target called them up and said, please, I want to carry it. It was the other way around. Rack jobbers a rack jobber owns a rack or a space of racks at a particular retail store, and their job is to job that rack. They literally put it on the pegboards, they maintain it, and they sell it. They can sell it like an advertising unit, if you will. The problem is, to gain access as a small company to the slots in these stores is pretty minimal. I mean, you have to literally have millions and millions of dollars behind you. And then there's shrinkage. These are products that you don't get back. Again, a lot of cases, you're just supplying it for free. Again, in payments, in the case of Square gave the card readers to Target and all these other stores.
That seems
well.
fine.
I'm not saying there's something wrong, okay? But let's move to another item. Let's move to potato chips, right? Check out in the U.S. Check out your potato chip aisle or your beverage aisle in most grocery stores. You'll see that it's basically one or two brands, and there'll be a few independent brands way off in a corner, probably dusty and put in sideways and all kinds of stuff. And very likely that person that had that brand, if they're a small entrepreneur, paid for that slot at that store, either regionally or nationally. Do they get the best treatment? Well, again, it is buyer beware. A lot of these small entrepreneurs don't recognize what they're buying into. It's like buying really bad advertising, like pay per. Let's say you pay pay per impression at Google Gmail, right? Let's just say somehow they sold that advertising.
Right.
And you go, hey man, I'm only paying a millionth of a penny per impression, and nobody sees it, right? And it's even
So
cheaper.
Brian, I had a question. So on this thing that President Obama has done, and hopefully billions of dollars will be released, how do you see that trickling down into the economic numbers that may come up in the next 1 or 2 quarters?
I think its long-term effect is what I'm really looking for, because if we can
Do you think we'll see a spike?
We're definitely going to see a spike. Just with the 26 companies and more that have probably jumped on since then.
Not a spike in those companies, though. You're talking about a spike.
You're going to see a spike in the economy. You're going to see new job creation. There's no doubt. Okay, just by what we saw on Friday, there's no doubt there's going to be job creation. That's number one, because basically what these companies are going to do, they're going to be flush with cash. They have these contracts already. And the thing that they were really dragging on usually is job creation. They just stretch the people they have out and they give them longer hours. Things like this, when you can get paid quicker and you have really good bona fide contracts with IBM or Apple, you say, oh, let's hire two more workers. We'll speed up the production line, et cetera. You may have more marketing and advertising, unlikely, but that's possible. You definitely see companies grow.
So see a companies in the SMBs, not in the corporate companies. There's no outstanding advantage to them.
Well, yes, long term. Okay, so what trickles back up is that you have a more innovative, robust, small and medium-sized business marketplace in the United States, and that creates higher profitability for the companies because they have better quality parts, more innovation. The reason why Apple is buying so many parts in the United States, some of it is, they want to try to support the U.S. economy, and some of it is they want to be able to get it quicker without all of the overhead and shipping that comes from buying pallets coming on boats from China. So, they're utilizing rail, which is significantly less costly to get the parts rolled in. And so what happens is by bolstering up this level of the economy, Apple's going to have far more access to these small businesses. Instead of seeing them receding, I think that recession is going to stop to some degree and reverse its trend. And over time, as these companies can get paid faster, in my view and in my fantasy, the speed of payment should pretty much be the instant you receive the goods. That's where I'd love to see it. 15 days is beautiful. All right.
Yeah, that would make sense. Almost like every other business in the world, right? When you go in and buy something, you have to pay for it immediately. Exactly.
And the fact that we're still hobbled by this, early industrial revolution, lack of innovation, it was mind blowing to me. And to see, to see these incredible people, really, I just think they're incredible for putting a program like this together rapidly and getting the president to act on it. in a decisive way and to get the people involved really blew me away. I mean, I didn't get very many opportunities in my life to be too close to politics for a lot of reasons by choice, but actually seeing this in action was very motivational to me to see that. I always thought that everything took for decades,
Yeah. Right, so maybe this is almost a question more for you, but Brian too. Is this a problem or an opportunity rather in other countries as well?
I think
is it the same sort of ecosystem?
Circular debt exists almost in every country that I know of. Very, very few economies don't have it, but majority of the world has it. The developing world has it, and it's almost like a hydra. For example, if you were to take the example of Apple. They want to make more and more iMacs, more and more iPhones, and push them out to the public, etc. And hopefully, more and more people will buy them. But if they start holding back on the payments to the suppliers, these suppliers also have family members who would like to buy an iMac or an iPhone, and they can't. The reason, they don't have the money. Their money's been held up because their dad didn't get paid for the factory he worked for, and so forth. So, and this is not just. It's not a very complex product, or it's not a very complex payment instrument that you're sort of holding on to. It's a very simple. It's a very simple thing. You're holding on to the money that you should have released long time ago. You're essentially running your operations in many manners on the money of your suppliers. The cost of funding for you is zero. So it is a huge issue, and I think if it'd be interesting to see if more companies get on this thing. Get on the bandwagon, and this does become law. Let's hope it does in some manner. It would be a huge thing. I mean, I cannot even. You have to understand.
Why doesn't free market win in that situation? If you look on the side of a libertarian or something, they would say virtually that the more law and regulation you introduce to the system, the worse off you are long term.
Well, it's a matter of being fair. I provided you the goods, you owe me money. But there's an underwritten rule that says that if I ask for my money, I'm no longer a supplier for you. I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, and the free market does work, when it's allowed to, and there's times when it's really kind of contorted.
And this is a classic case for a government to step in. A classic case, and
it's funny you brought the whole thing about being able to buy a product. Henry Ford was actually a big believer in this. Ironically, again, going back to the Industrial Revolution and the automobile, he walked out on his factory floor, probably I think it was about a year into building these, and he said, "How come none of my workers can afford my cars?" And he completely turned the company upside down. I mean, they almost wanted to get him certified insane, literally. He said, "I'm not going to stop until everybody who works for me can afford to drive in on a Ford automobile." And he didn't stop there. He said, "The same goes to all my suppliers." And that's the other part of the story that most people don't recognize. Henry went around and said, "What am I doing where you can't afford to buy my automobile?" So he literally set the price, and then he challenged his workers to make it profitable. It's similar to what Steve Jobs did with the 99-cent iTunes,
you work backwards, you work backwards.
Yeah, and so he was really great with suppliers. I mean, he would build really tight relationships. He would attend graduations for the daughters and sons of some of his suppliers, godfather for some of them. It was really a nice sort of environment. And that's when the markets are working good, when everybody sees that there's an ecosystem. The problem is, on a world stage, this all breaks down because it becomes more political and it becomes currency things, and it gets really complex. So I hope to see that this becomes sort of a mandate, an automatic thing. I think leadership is the best way to approach this, but I think if large businesses don't keep their commitments and don't see how important this is, it probably will become mandated in a very significant way.
There's a counter argument that people will say, well, these companies aren't really holding on to that cash, and they're investing this cash into the stock market, etc. I doubt it, because I doubt that the money that is due would be invested into equities or maybe government bonds, but certainly not risky elements or risky payment avenues.
You identified it quite exactly. And that is, this is money that has already been due and payable to a business. It's not yours to play with. And we can speculate on what a criminal does. Let's just say somebody steals your money, $1 million, and invests it and does great things with it. The money is still not theirs. And it's still not fair that money is not being delivered to the party.
Yeah, and answering to Mike's question, the free economy and free market. Well, this is exactly the kind of laws you need, that if this is money owed to a supplier, you cannot invest it elsewhere. And hence the government oversight, or maybe a regulatory oversight, maybe on a state level or a federal level, but nonetheless.
Well, certainly the Securities
it's almost
Exchange,
close to the legislative branch. It's almost like, I think government is pure when they have the legislative branch to allow people to prosecute and mandate an efficient system for determining truth.
I'll give you an analogous example. How would you feel if the bank started trading with your deposit money?
Right.
you can't have your money today. No, you can't have your money today. We're going to give it to you in 90 days.
And suddenly you say, well, hold on, where's the legislator? Well, in this case, I guess all these thousands and thousands of workers and families and businesses are perhaps seeing the same thing. Where's the legislator, when it comes to this thing? Apple is not being fair to me, or Boeing is not being fair to me, or Ford is not being fair to me, Caterpillar is not being fair to me. And, my money's stuck.
Yeah, it's just a matter of enforcing the laws. And, the Securities and Exchange Commission, for example, could go after public companies, and they can literally ask for an audit. How quickly are you paying your suppliers? Well, why is that important to the Securities and Exchange Commission? Because that money is showing on the books of these companies.
It's a liability.
It really is. That's right. It should really be, I don't know how it's being showed. I know that there are GAAP requirements, generally agreed upon practices in accounting, that should signify this money correctly. But I'm not only certain, I've seen times when that money has been listed on the wrong column. So I think it's important that people just follow those steps. There's no greater good that a big company is doing with all that cash that could not be countered in the hands of the people who deserve it.
How most circular debt starts. It starts with let's hold on to the money for 30 days. Our books will look good.
Sure.
32 days, our books will look good. Or let's just hold it for another week. Our books will look good, because it's cash in hand. It is liability, but it's cash in hand nonetheless.
And if you're living quarter to quarter, like a lot of marginal
corporate America does.
Yeah, a lot of marginal public companies are doing. They thrive on whatever technique they can do to just get another bump in the stock. And it's sad, but that's you can see that's how it started. So when Mike was talking about the libertarian aspect to this, well, if you're going to be a public company, you should be operating under the rules and guidelines that are established, and that is to operate in a very legal and ethical way. I would say from a very legal way, if you owe somebody money and you're not paying them, you're probably breaking a number of laws within the Securities and Exchange Commission. If it was really, dotted I and T crossed, and you're probably violating a number of state laws. But nobody's going after anybody for this, because, again, it comes down to that small contractor. Absolutely, can he go to court? He can go to court. Absolutely, he can get a lawyer.
Not financially worth it for him.
No, but it's worse than that. He's out of business because basically every purchase order, the purchase order divisions of a lot of companies, they all know each other. It's a relatively small group of individuals. I mean, these are incredibly powerful individuals. They know where to find goods. They know how to negotiate, and they have their own trade groups. And I've come to meet these individuals, and they're extremely, extremely sharp. A lot of them come from the military, working within the Army for purchase and acquisition. And either way, if you've become a bellyacher, probably everybody's going to know about you. There's going to be a mark on your on your front door that only they know. And they're going to say, well, yeah, sorry, I'm not going to do business with you because, you went and sued, FedEx for, $3 million. And,
right.
It's like a business that has its money tied up. And the roofing contractor comes and he says, you need a new roof. And he says, well, I can't afford it because money's with Apple. Now, if he had the money, the roofing contractor gets money. The roofing contractor probably hires 4 people. They get money. So it trickles down and it keeps expanding.
It flourishes. So
it does
so
a
right,
lot.
Yeah.
It does. And the consequences can be of great magnitude for the economy.
Now, do you see this in Pakistan? I mean, are you seeing it as often? Is it a known issue? Talked about?
So one of the biggest things in Pakistan is circular debt within the power industry. So the people who generate the power, they pay it to distribution companies, distribute it, and then they go collect the money. Well, guess who's not paying? The government is not paying. So when the government doesn't pay, it starts this whole thing, or the government says, well, I'm not going to pay you all of it right now. We'll pay you in 90 days. And the same sequence starts all over again. So the suppliers have to reduce their power, their output capacity.
Wow.
So power shortages start, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's a huge mess. But circular debt it's a monster to deal with, really is.
So would that be on the front page of the newspapers? Would the average citizen know that the government's delaying payments to the power company, and that's why your TV is not running or the air conditioner's off?
Absolutely. Not only the front page. I mean, governments can be brought down because of this thing.
Wow. See, I didn't know about that. And is this just in your region, or
no? It's
the greater region?
It's almost in every developing country. For example, Brazil had this issue with their shipbuilding industry and their beef industry. They would export beef, and the money would not come in, et cetera, et cetera. Spain had a huge issue with circular debt because of a lot of government spending went down, and the government spending, not only did it go down, but they held back on the funds. And when they held back on the funds, so many people got affected, and circular debt became a huge issue. So it's in almost every economy. I mean, you think U.S. is one of the most advanced economies, and here we are discussing the classical definition of circular debt.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone ever said we're the most advanced in the back end payment infrastructure. That's for sure.
No, not at all.
Not our forte.
But it's just good to see this sort of leadership. I mean, it's good to see that there's something being
Brian.
done.
Very happy to know that something like this came out, and you were very glad that you were a part of it.
Yeah, let me ask you, Brian, if you think, in one sentence, if you were to say the next big project that they should look at, the next big project that the White House should give its attention for the general economy, maybe in payments, maybe not in payments, where do you think that they should point their nose?
Oh my gosh! In one sentence.
Faisal, you have to answer this one too. Just one category, right?
Yeah,
whether it's ACH transfers, whether it's
I think what I've learned is that the desire to be on the front edge of innovation within this part of the White House is very high. I mean, there's a high desire to look at the innovations that are taking place and to try to see what kind of leadership the government can play, not to chase after it, but to actually champion it. And to me, I think that's incredible. It's historic, and there's a lot of opportunity. And so I believe that we're going to see more of a desire to understand the complexities that technology is solving real problems, and looking at things like the ACH networking, looking at things that are taking too long, that are really not serving people that are involved in it, in these systems. There's like saying, well, it was here before I got here, and I just make sure that I put duct tape here and I don't mess with it. And a lot of times it takes a leader to stand up and say, okay, almost maybe, look at a reinvention. And a lot of times industry is so, especially highly regulated industry like banking, when you look at the free market, you say, well, can't they just do it on their own? Well, they're so regulated that sometimes they've got themselves hogtied.
So would you say banking? Is that where you think they should look at in terms, like what specifically would you think that would be the most So an inefficient system. I would say my vote is just they should look at the ACH house, right? To take 3 to 5 days to send payments. I feel it in our business. We get burned on it every day, hundreds of times. And I know this is, a problem millions of people experience is why does it take 3 days to send payments? And maybe
well, look at it this way. $37 trillion processed in 2012. $37 trillion.
Yeah.
Approximate income made from it, it's anyone's guess, but somewhere between $24 and $36 billion. There is no doubt in my mind, if you want economic agitation, that is basically you have an economy that is not stagnant, but is agitated, is moving like a swarm of bees. The only solution is faster payments, and faster means instant payments.
Yeah.
In any economy that has implemented a faster payment switch has seen its numbers go up. Yes, you will lose out on your existing revenue stream, but you will make much, much more because the volumes will just shoot up.
It's like any this would be classic disruption to some level, right? And in any classic disruption, there are great opportunities for existing players not to quote unquote dominate it again or monopolize it necessarily, but there's great opportunity. I think it's very obvious from the shows that we do and the people I've talked to that, the youth are not going to visit the bank just like they're not going to buy a VHS tape or a CD. Being out at Warped Tour, I talked to, which is a music tour that goes around the United States in the summer. I talked to lots and lots of people, very young people, 14, 16 years old. They have never purchased any form of media on a physical substance. They don't have DVDs. They don't have CDs. They will never know what that's like. And guess what? They will probably never walk into the bank other than to visit the ATM machine.
Great.
So here's what's going to happen. As that generation grows and moves through the economy, their relationship with the bank, like Brett King has mentioned and others in our show, is going to change dramatically. And if the bankers, this is a wake-up call. A lot of it has to do with, what does a bank serve and what is its relationship with a modern, in a modern context with our technology. But also the frustration that you're experiencing and Faisal is experiencing if he needs somebody in the U.S. to send him payment, et cetera. The movement of money is extraordinarily complex. And it is somewhat tied to politics and laws because it's so regulated. It's so highly regulated. And if you're an existing stakeholder, you pretty much want nobody to mess with your cheese. You just want to kind of go along. And that's pretty much how the financial sector has been for decades. But on the other side of that, you don't ever want to see people lose money. So a lot of times regulators doing what they think is the good thing, they'll overregulate because they don't want to see grandma lose, her life savings because the bank operated irresponsibly.
So, okay, makes sense. I'll take your answer as the effective general banking.
I think so. I think
banking is one of those things where the bankers have failed to see the fine writing on the wall that nothing lasts forever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think leadership can change that. I think having bold leaders pretty much almost do like
also
Kennedy
industry
did
experts
with the moon.
I think honestly, no joke, they're smart for bringing you in, right? People who obsess about and think about these things all the time on the inside that may not work for one particular company. You're unbiased in large part, so go White House for bringing Brian in, and we hope to hear more about your. We hope to hear more and see you on stage. Very soon.
I don't know about that. I mean, I'm just honored to have a small part, and if it's just me, giving some of my knowledge, and if I can be of help, I'm really more than happy. And like I said, it does a great thing.
Good on
you. Yeah,
thanks,
Brian. All right, guys, this is really interesting. Brian, Faisal, really enjoyed it.
Thank you, gentlemen. Touch base next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Right, take care. Bye-bye.